All the way home, Nick couldn't stop grinning. He hadn't expected to hear about the promotion for another couple of weeks, but just that morning, Rosen had come striding into his office and delivered the good news. "The boys upstairs really like the way you handled that Japanese situation, Nick, and none of us sees any point in waiting around. So let me be the first one to shake the hand of our new vice president for Far East sales." Nick gulped, thanked Rosen, and spent nearly an hour discussing the perks and responsibilities of the new position. After that, Nick was simply too euphoric to stay in his office any longer. He called Suzanne in and gave her the news. "Suzanne, I hope you won't mind changing jobs." He watched with amusement as her face fell. "Nick, are you replacing me?" She looked genuinely wounded. "Not at all, Suzanne. You know I couldn't get a thing done without you. It's just that you'll have to accustom yourself to working for the vice president for Far East sales. Think you can handle that?" Susan looked blank, then squealed with joy and gave Nick a big hug. She was a competent, rather stout middle-aged woman, a good 15 years older than Nick, but she'd worked for him practically since his first days at Thomas & Chemical, and they were genuinely fond of one another. She and her husband had advised Nick and Emily on the best school districts when they were planning to buy a house. Nick had helped Suzanne's oldest son find an internship at Thomason after his freshman year of college. Susan babbled away happily, asking Nick a million questions about the new job. When he finally could get a word in edgewise, he said, "I'm going to ask you to hold the fort for today, okay? I've just got to get home and give Emily the news." They hugged again, and Nick headed for the parking lot. Champagne, he thought. Champagne, and an afternoon together. It was July, so Emily's summer vacation from teaching was in full swing, and both Charlie and Ben were at day camp until nearly 5:30. There'd be plenty of time. Nick banged the steering wheel rhythmically, singing along with the Beach Boys in a loud, not terribly pleasant baritone. No need to stop for champagne. He knew there was a bottle in the fridge, unopened since their 11th anniversary about 2 months earlier. He could hardly wait to burst in with his news, grab Emily, and enjoy some quality time together. But just as Nick swung the car onto Thornton Drive, he saw Emily's VW headed down the street in the opposite direction. Too far away for him to catch up without speeding dangerously down the quiet residential street. He grabbed his phone and called her cell, but it seemed to be turned off. Singing to himself, Nick parked in the garage and headed inside. Maybe she'd just gone grocery shopping or run some errands. Perhaps they'd still have a couple of hours later in the afternoon. He ran upstairs and changed out of his business clothes, coming back downstairs in shorts and a t-shirt. Making himself a quick sandwich and grabbing a beer, he wandered out towards the backyard patio. But as he passed the study, he noticed Emily had left the computer on. Out of curiosity, he went over to see what she'd been doing. Her email was open, but it wasn't her school account. Instead, it was a Hotmail account he knew nothing about, with her username using her middle name and birthday. Why did she have a second email account? He glanced at the sent folder, seeing only 2 names. Her sister April in California and an unfamiliar one, chitsatu.com. There were about 8 messages to that address, including her most recent one. Nick clicked it open. "Oh my God, your message made my heart jump. I can't risk Sunday. No telling what Nick might be doing. Let's meet there Monday at 11. I can't wait, Lovey." Nick sat back in shock, staring at the screen. What the hell? His lunch forgotten. Nick grimly settled down to dig through Emily's email and do some digging on the web. It took an hour before he had the full picture. Jason Pritzker was an educational consultant who had spent 2 weeks at Emily's school in early May, leading professional development workshops with the teachers. The picture on his webpage showed a good-looking man in his late 30s, a couple of years older than Nick and Emily. He was married with several kids and lived over in Jefferson Meadows, past the airport to the east of Columbus, about 25 miles from Nick and Emily's house in Grove City. From what Nick could tell, Pritzker had set his sights on Emily during the workshops and had pursued her since. Their exchanged messages had begun cautiously, but then became increasingly open and passionate. Pritzker had written 2 weeks earlier that kissing her had been the most thrilling experience of his life, and he carried the memory of it with him. They had met alone at least 3 times, and it was clear that while Pritzker hadn't yet been intimate with her, he was getting close. His most recent message to Emily read, "My beautiful E, I have never seen or touched anyone so stunning. You are a goddess. We need more time together. I ache to be with you completely. Can you get away on Sunday to the usual place?" Emily had apparently only confided in her sister April about the situation. Unsurprisingly, April was horrified and kept trying to talk her out of it. A week earlier, April had written, "Are you out of your mind? Remember what happened to my friend Monica? Her husband found out and threw her out of the house. Did you know she's living in a tiny apartment and only gets to see her kids twice a week? Is a brief fling really worth this if Nick finds out?" There were 3 or 4 other messages from April along the same lines, one of which said, "Nick loves you, Em, and he makes a good living and is a fantastic father to Charlie and Ben. You told me yourself that you couldn't imagine being married to a better man, and that you love him now even more than when you got married. So what are you doing?" It seemed Emily didn't have very good answers to that question, though Nick was hardly an unbiased judge. In one of her first messages to April about Pritzker, Emily had written that she wasn't planning on doing anything serious with him. It was just harmless flirting and a bit of fun. She had admitted that life with Nick could be repetitive. Teaching, cooking, cleaning, taking care of the boys, and so on. With Pritzker, she felt a spark and a sense of being admired, which she missed. More recently, Emily had written, "Just relax a little. It's just a fling. It probably won't even last a month, and I'm being super careful. But I have to say, it was quite exciting when we were affectionate. I think being with him will be amazing, and then it'll be over. And Nick will have me back, happier than ever." Nick knew he had to get out of there. He didn't want to see Emily. He needed to process the shock, pain, and anger. He left the computer exactly as he had found it, finished his sandwich, and tidied up the kitchen before changing into his business clothes and leaving the house. An idea was brewing, but Nick knew he needed time to think it through. He drove straight to the gym and swam laps for an hour. By the time he was showering and getting dressed, he had mostly worked out his plan. Nick was a direct, goal-oriented person. At 14, he had worked to build the largest paper route he could handle. In college, he earned a business degree in 3 years to start his career sooner. When he met Emily 2 years after graduation, he knew after their first date that he wanted to marry her. He wooed her ardently, energetically, and romantically. He discovered that she loved the ballet and got tickets for her. When he met her mother, he asked about Emily's favorite flowers and bought them for her. In short, he did what he always did. He pursued what he wanted decisively. After 8 months, they were practically living together, and when Nick proposed at a restaurant after a long romantic dinner, she cried and said yes, throwing her arms around him and marveling at the ring he slid onto her finger. As people around them smiled, their marriage seemed perfect to Nick, though it certainly had its challenges. Emily was generous, loving, and had a great sense of humor. She was terrific with their boys, and Nick knew she loved him. Their relationship had become somewhat routine, primarily due to the demands of 2 careers and taking care of their young children, but it was still satisfying. Nick had no idea that Emily was feeling restless or frustrated, let alone that she might be involved in an affair. It angered him beyond measure that she was pursuing this so calculatedly. This wasn't a one-time mistake, something he might have been able to understand. Instead, she was being pursued by someone, and she was indulging in it, thinking a brief affair was acceptable because her life felt a bit stale. Nick found himself clenching his teeth as he thought about everything. If Emily wanted change, he would give her a change, though it wouldn't be the one she hoped for. When he stepped through the door around 6:30, the same as usual, he had his plans well worked out. He had spent 2 hours in the library with his laptop, exchanging messages with his friend Brian Wares, who worked in it. Brian had sent him the file he needed along with detailed instructions on how to use it. Nick was so furious with Emily that he figured she would definitely notice something was off, which was actually part of his plan. He wanted Emily to feel uneasy, to sense that something was troubling him that he wasn't ready to discuss. When he found her in the kitchen and gave her a kiss, he avoided making eye contact. He pulled away from her hug a bit faster than usual and went to greet the boys more abruptly than normal. At dinner, he allowed himself to seem distant and troubled. Emily noticed this, and he could see it was confusing her. After the boys were in bed and they were watching TV in the bedroom, Emily asked, "What's wrong? Is it something at work, honey? You seem so distracted tonight." She was concerned but not frightened. He could see she didn't suspect anything to do with her. He sighed heavily. "I've just got some stuff on my mind, that's all. Some decisions to make about work." "Is it that promotion thing still up in the air?" she asked. Nick looked at her seriously, holding the silence a moment too long. "No, it's nothing like that. Nothing with work." Emily slid over to take his hands. "Then what, baby? Don't let it twist you up. Tell me what's going on." She was all love and support, and it infuriated him. He pulled his hands away and said, "I'm not ready to talk about it. Maybe in a few days. I need to do some thinking first." Emily stared at him, troubled by how uncharacteristic this was. She still wasn't frightened. It hadn't occurred to her that he knew about her affair with Pritzker. "Okay," she said finally. "Just don't shut me out. I love you. Let me help." He grunted noncommittally and turned back to the TV, feeling her gaze on him. Around 10:30, Emily went down the hall to check on the boys, and when she returned, she went into the bathroom to get ready for bed. When she emerged, Nick knew what she had in mind. She was wearing a light blue nightgown, her favorite, and had brushed out her hair, leaving it down around her shoulders. She looked fantastic, but Nick was too upset to notice. He was furious, hurt, and angry. He had given Emily everything: his heart, devotion, hard work, and 2 fantastic boys they both adored. Did she think his life was always filled with excitement and that he was secretly unfaithful with someone else? No, that wasn't the case. While the email to Pritzker was unsettling, it wasn't enough to deter him from his plan. At 10:15, Nick pulled his car back into the driveway. He had already informed the office he'd be out in the morning. His plan had been to surprise Emily as she was getting ready to meet Pritzker, but she canceled that meeting. Instead, he found her on the phone, likely with her sister. She turned to him in surprise. "Hi, Nick." "Ah, give me a sec. April, Nick's come back home. How about if I call you later?" "Okay, bye." She hung up and came over to Nick. "Is everything okay, honey? I didn't expect to see you this morning." Nick gave her a serious, troubled look. "Just come sit in the living room with me, okay? I need to talk to you." She sat on the couch and watched him pace, acting uncertain. He saw her worried look and finally sat in a chair across from her. "Emily, I was going to talk to you about this tonight, but I realized there's no reason to wait. There's no good time to say it. I'm moving out. I think I'm going to get a divorce." He watched her as her mouth dropped open in shock. She stared at him, swallowed hard. "Nick, why? We love each other. We have a great marriage. Why?" She began to cry. "Why would you do this? Walk out on me and Charlie and Ben?" He got up and paced the room, delivering the words he had been thinking about since Friday. "There's just no spark anymore, Emily. Married life is so repetitive. I go to work, come home, play with the boys, get them to bed, watch TV with you, and we kiss each other goodnight before going to sleep. Then we do the same thing the next day. I need something new, something that excites me, something that makes me feel alive." He stopped and looked at Emily, who had gone pale. He wondered how obvious it was that he was reflecting her own words to her sister back at her. "I've met someone," he said. "No," she shouted, looking desperate. She jumped up. "Please, Nick, please tell me you're not." She broke down sobbing. "I'm not having an affair, Emily. I wouldn't do that to you. I haven't even kissed her or touched her yet, and I won't, not while we're still together." He stopped, watching her cry, her whole body shaking. Then he spoke his final sentences. "I want that spark. I want someone who will make me feel attractive and alive again, instead of feeling like a drudge who's getting old before his time. Listen, I'll be away on a business trip until Friday. I've got a motel room reserved for when I get back. I'll call you, and we can find a time to talk and figure out how we're going to settle things. If you want to speak to a lawyer, that would probably be a good idea." She gazed at him in horror as he pulled out the suitcase from behind the couch. "No, Nick, please. Can't we?" "I'm so sorry, Emily," he said, and turned to leave, listening to her sobs of despair behind him. As angry and hurt as he was, he still felt for her. She was in agony, and part of him that thought serves her right battled with the part that wanted to come back into the house, hold her in his arms, kiss away her tears, and tell her everything would be all right. As he thought to himself with a grim satisfaction, Nick sat at his desk staring out the window. He had gone straight to work. The business trip he had told Emily about was a cover. He wanted her to have a few days to feel miserable. He had asked Suzanne to come in and briefly explain the situation to her. "Emily and I are having, well, a little tension at home, so I'm staying away for a couple of days. She thinks I'm on a business trip until Thursday night, in case she happens to call." Susan looked troubled. "I'm so sorry, Nick. Is there anything I can do?" He shook his head. "Thanks, no, Suzanne. I hope we're going to get through it." She smiled a little and said, "Been there, done that. Ralph and I once split up for almost a month, way back before we had the kids. It was pretty grim at the time, but now we look back and joke about it." They chatted a bit more before Suzanne went back out of the office, and Nick realized he felt a little better. "God knows I'm not the only guy who ever had marriage trouble," he thought to himself. The 3 days passed quickly. Nick booked a nice room at the Hyatt on Capitol Square so he could walk to and from his office. He worked late every day, getting back to his room around 9 p.m. for a quick room service dinner. He accomplished a lot, sketching out his short-term and long-range plans for his new department, making phone calls, and emailing his contacts in Tokyo. He checked his cell phone a couple of times a day, always finding one or more messages from Emily, which he deleted without listening. He did the same with her emails after glancing through them, to make sure there were no problems with his sons. Nick was lonely, of course. He missed Emily, despite his anger, and he missed the boys like crazy. He even considered parking down the street from his house to catch a glimpse of them, but decided to wait until Friday. The business trip gave him a taste of what a divorce might actually mean, and he didn't like it one bit. The plan was to scare Emily, really put the fear of God in her, and see if that was enough to get her to reconsider and repair their marriage. If not, he would deal with it then. With a degree of self-restraint that made him proud, Nick waited until Thursday afternoon to check Emily's secret email account. He wanted to see what she'd been up to but didn't want to torment himself constantly. When he looked, he found nothing to or from April. Obviously, she and Emily had been talking on the phone. There were 6 messages from Pritzker since Monday morning. Why had she changed her mind? What had happened to the connection they had shared? What had he done wrong? Why was she mad at him? Clearly, Pritzker had known how close he was to getting Emily, and it was frustrating to be denied now. Nick smiled to himself as he saw that Emily had ignored the first 4 messages. In response to the 5th one sent on Wednesday, she simply wrote back, "Jason, let it go. I'm not going to see you again. Stop contacting me." Pritzker had written once more, but half-heartedly, saying, "Okay, but keep me in mind." He knew he had lost at least for now. And Nick thought, "I've won at least for now, but for how long?" That was the question. What was to prevent this from happening again? On Friday, Nick called Emily from his cell. He tried to sound businesslike without being too brusque. "Hi, Emily, it's me. How are the boys?" "Nick, my God." He heard her starting to sniffle. "How are you? I've missed you so much, and the boys." She started to cry. "I'm getting on the plane in a few minutes, okay? I'll be home for dinner tonight. I was wondering if your parents could maybe take the boys on Saturday and keep them overnight for a visit, so you and I could have some time to talk." He could hear her pulling herself together. I'm sure they'd love that. I'll call them today and set it up." "Honey, what would you like for dinner tonight?" "I'd like to make us something really special," Emily said. Nick grinned. "Oh, I don't care. Don't go to any trouble. Just make something that Ben and Charlie like, hot dogs or whatever." "Okay, honey." She was obviously disappointed. What was she expecting? That he'd fall right back into her arms. Nick shook his head. "Gotta go. See you tonight. Bye." He hung up, not waiting for the "I love you" that was sure to follow. Nick's return was fantastic. The boys were all over him, wild with excitement. He let them wrestle him, clutch him, and tell him all their stories of the past few days. They were thrilled with the Columbus Clippers hats. He bought them and ran to get their baseball gloves so they could have a catch in the backyard. Emily watched all this with obvious sadness. He let her hug him when he arrived but pulled away far sooner than she wanted, and her eyes followed him despairingly as he threw himself back into the lives of their sons. Maybe she'd hoped that a shocking announcement had only been a mirage, that things would go back to normal, but it clearly wasn't happening. Nick let Ben and Charlie stay up ridiculously late, almost until 11 o'clock, partly to prolong Emily's obvious misery, but mostly because he just missed them. It wasn't until they could hardly keep their eyes open that he agreed with Emily that it was time to get them into bed. After the last story and the last glass of water, he wasted no time getting ready for bed himself before Emily could attempt either a conversation or anything else. Nick already had his head on the pillow and the light out. She still tried. "Honey, could we talk for a few minutes?" Nick smiled to himself in the dark. "Tomorrow, okay. This was an exhausting trip, and the boys wore me out tonight. Are your folks taking them tomorrow?" "Yes," Emily said. "I said I'd drive them over around 11 o'clock. "Okay then, sleep well." He offered her no kiss, no hug. Now that he was home again, the anger that had died down a bit during his busy week at work was roaring through him. It took him a long time to fall asleep, and as he lay there, he was aware of Emily tossing and turning as well. Saturday breakfast was subdued, though you wouldn't have known it by Charlie and Ben, who were jumping around with extra energy. Dad was back, and they were going to Grandma and Grandpa for an overnight visit. "Can we take our baseball gloves and our new hats? Will Grandpa play baseball with us?" they asked. Nick quietly enjoyed Emily's mournful looks, and when she was ready to drive off with the boys, he just said, "We'll talk when you get back." But the house was empty when Emily returned, and she had a miserable hour sitting at the kitchen table, looking out at the driveway and imagining the worst before Nick walked in with an armload of U-Haul boxes. She burst into tears. Nick handed her a napkin. "Come on, Emily, it's all right. Let's just talk this through like two adults." He had to wait nearly 5 minutes until her sobbing subsided and another 5 while she washed her face and repaired her makeup. When she came back, she looked better, still devastated, but in Nick's eyes, oddly beautiful. He really was crazy about her. The stupid things he thought. She got them cups of coffee and sat back down at the table. "Can I talk first?" Emily asked. Nick nodded. She leaned forward and looked at him imploringly. "I don't want a divorce. I don't want a separation. I want you and I want our marriage back. I love you and I know you love me. Nick, you adore the boys. We should be together. And I'll do anything I can to make our marriage better. Anything. Just tell me where to start." He gazed at her, keeping his face neutral. "The excitement's gone, Emily. Don't tell me you don't feel it too. All the routine, the dishes, the boys, the bills. Can you tell me honestly that you haven't noticed that you haven't been tempted to find something else? Something a little more exciting. Something or someone that would put a spark back in your life. The moment of truth. He wondered if she'd burst into tears again, run out of the room, or even look straight into his face and lie to him. Instead, she said, "Yes, I felt it, Nick, and I've been an absolute idiot. I'm afraid when you hear about it, you'll just walk out the door and I'll never see you again." She was trembling, squeezing the fingers of her left hand with her right so hard he was afraid she'd break them. But she didn't stop looking at him with a straight face. "What are you talking about?" he asked stiffly. She got up, went to the cabinet above the refrigerator, and pulled out 3 pieces of paper. "I just couldn't bear telling you about this, so I wrote it all down. I'll go into the bedroom and give you all the time you need. But Nick, will you promise me, please, if only for all the years we've been together, will you promise me that you'll come talk to me about this before you decide what you're going to do?" He looked into her frightened, tear-stained face. "Okay," he said. He took the papers and went into the living room to read them, hearing her crying behind him as she went down the hall towards their bedroom. There was little in her letter that he didn't already know or had pretty much guessed. She'd met Pritzker at the seminar, and he'd singled her out and flirted with her discreetly. He had gotten her email address and invited her out for what would appear to be an innocent business lunch. Emily had been flattered, and he had smoothly worked on her over a period of weeks. At some early point, he suggested she set up a private email account just so no one would misunderstand their relationship. She appeared to be telling the whole truth as far as Nick could tell. There had been 4 occasions when she and Pritzker had gone beyond acceptable behavior for a man and a woman married to other people. The first had been a long, lingering kiss in the parking lot behind a lunch spot where they had coffee together. After that, there were 3 encounters in Pritzker's car parked in a secluded lane near a local golf course, where the physical nature of their meetings progressed each time. It was reminiscent of high school, Nick thought. The second time, Pritzker had unhooked her bra and touched her. The third time, she had removed her blouse and bra completely. Amid the letters of desperate apologies and affirmations of her love for Nick, Emily had been very hard on herself. She admitted to being naive about Pritzker's intentions initially, and then denying how serious and wrong her behavior had become. "I just lied to myself, Nick," she wrote in the end. "I pushed all thoughts of my marriage vows and my responsibility to you and the boys out of my mind. I acted as though this was nothing more than a little bit of flirting with a friend at a party. I am more ashamed than I can possibly express. When you told me you were thinking about divorce, it hit me suddenly how selfish and childish I had been to think that my desire for a little excitement entitled me to act out behind your back. I didn't go further with him, but I won't lie and say it wouldn't have happened. It was what Pritzker was after, and it would have happened if you hadn't put an end to it. I'm done with him forever, absolutely. Even if you never forgive me or divorce me, I'm so sorry that I didn't recognize what I was doing to us sooner. I wonder if things would be different if I had put more energy into our marriage, making it more interesting and exciting instead of that misguided flirtation. I'm so sorry. Can you ever forgive me? Can you give me a chance to make this up to you? You're a foolish, loving wife, Emily." Nick sat for a while, gazing out at the backyard before he went into the bedroom. Emily was asleep, curled up in the fetal position under the bedspread. He stood watching her for a few minutes, then was overcome with a wave of exhaustion. He took off his clothes, lay down next to her in his boxers and t-shirt, and fell asleep almost immediately. Sometime later, he awoke feeling Emily's warmth against him. As he opened his eyes, he realized she was pressing against him, kissing his neck, and looking desperately into his face. When she saw him looking at her, she began to cry, holding onto him tightly. "Please, please," she said, "please love me. Please, Nick, whatever happens, whatever you're going to do, just hold me and love me." She pulled his t-shirt up and kissed his chest. Nick's response could be summarized by the thought, "What the hell?" He didn't know what was ahead, and he refused her advances. She clung to him and cried each time he moved to disengage himself. Finally, he said, "I need the bathroom, Emily," and she released him. When he returned, he sat up against the headboard, gazing at her unhappy, uncertain face. "How can I ever trust you again?" he asked. She lowered her head, nodding. "I mean, this wasn't a harmless fling or a one-night indiscretion. This was a flirtation, an affair over several weeks, planned meetings, emails back and forth. When can we meet? When will your husband be out of the way?" It was pretty cold-blooded. "I know," she said, not looking up. "It's really terrible what I did. I have no excuse. I didn't have a physical relationship with him, though. Not actual intimacy." Angrily, Nick said, "But you were going to, right? Until I messed up your plans." She nodded, tears on her face again. "So how can I ever trust you? How can I live with you after this without wondering when the next person will come along and work their way into your life?" Emily sat up straight, brightening. "You mean you're thinking about it? There might be some chance we could." She looked hopeful, but very nervous. "I don't know," Nick said. "Once burned, twice shy, right? I mean, you touch a hot stove and burn yourself. Maybe you learn your lesson. But there's also the thought, once a cheater, always a cheater. How do I know that if I find some way to get past this, to get over your betrayal, you won't do it again in a couple of years, once the dust has settled and everything is back to normal and life starts getting a little dull again?" Suddenly, he wanted to be out of there. He didn't want to talk anymore. He jumped up and started putting on his clothes. When Emily began to speak, he raised his hand. "No more, Emily." "Okay, not now. I'm going out. Make some dinner or call me, and I'll pick up some takeout. We can talk then." He left the bedroom. For some reason, the second, third, and fourth shots he took at the range were perfect drives, nearly 250 yards right down the middle. The next 50 were scattered, but he worked up a sweat, and the hour spent not thinking about his marriage was a relief. The relief ended on the drive back home, even though he took the long way around the park, enjoying the bright sunshine and the sight of joggers and bikers. He was still plagued by his questions. Emily had made a pella with shrimp and chorizo sausage, one of Nick's favorite meals. They ate it in near silence, with her anxiously examining his face for clues about his mood. When they cleared the plates, he said, "Let's go sit on the deck." She brought out 2 cups of coffee, and they sat at the little table. "Okay," he said, "the ball's in your court. You've screwed things up. How are you going to fix them? Do you want to stay with me?" "Nick, I love you," Emily said. "I love you and the boys. I don't want to be a single dad in a small one-bedroom apartment, seeing my kids on alternate weekends. But you've just blown this marriage up. How do you propose to put it back together?" She started to cry again and waved her hand at him. "Wait, please wait." She took a shuddering deep breath, brushed the tears off her face, and said, "I promised myself I wouldn't cry anymore. Just give me a minute." She stood up, arms folded tightly across her chest, and walked a few times around the deck before sitting back down to face him again. "Here's how," she said in a tight, almost strangled voice. "First, I confess everything to you, every part of my foolish behavior. I've tried to do that in the letter, and if you have any more questions now or later, just ask, and I'll answer them. Second, I apologize to you, not just once, but as many times as it takes until you really know how sorry and ashamed I am. Ashamed of what I did and sorry for the pain I caused you." She knelt before him, putting her arms on his knees and looking up at him. "I am so sorry, Nick. I hurt you. Very badly, and there's no excuse. I was a selfish idiot. I hope there will be a time when you'll be able to forgive me. But I know it's not now. Not yet." Still watching him, she got up and returned to her chair. "Third, I will make it up to you every single day by showing you that I can be a loving wife who is devoted to you, who appreciates you, who wants to make you happy, and who is happy just being your wife." She ticked off the points on her fingers. "I'm going to be loving, patient, supportive, attentive, and fun. I'm going to pamper you, cater to you, and make sure you're getting what you need. And that includes our intimate life. I know things have gotten a bit routine, but no more. If I have to work on improving our connection and making things more exciting, I'm willing to do that. And what about the other woman? Nick asked, keeping his face neutral. Emily bit her lip. I don't have control over that. I'd like you to never see her again, but it isn't up to me. But I know what I'd like. Do you think we could try for a month? Just you and me, with me doing everything I can to make you happy, keep you interested, and show you how sorry I am, and how much I adore you. Nick got up and walked to the far end of the deck, his back to Emily. Grinning to himself, he felt a strange mixture of anger, excitement, and pride. He had done what he always did, figured out what he wanted, gone after it, and gotten it, or at least it seemed that way. He turned around. Okay, Emily, I'll give it a month. It's not like I was in a big hurry to walk out of this house and away from the boys, and I won't see her again while we're trying to fix things. Emily jumped up with an eager smile and came towards him, but he raised a hand to stop her. But don't think for a minute that I'm not furious with you, or that I trust you one bit, because I don't. What you did was shabby and cheap, unworthy of you, and certainly unworthy of the love I've given you. It just sucked. He turned away from her and stomped back into the house. A month went by, and then a couple of weeks more. Nick didn't bring up the deadline, and Emily certainly wasn't going to. It was okay. Things were okay. It seemed to him they were getting along, and Charlie and Ben seemed totally unaware of any problems. At least that was a good thing. Emily was attentive, devoted, and loving. They were intimate as much as Nick could have wanted, and she was almost desperately eager to please him. It wasn't just about their intimate life. There were back rubs, special desserts, and a weekend away at a charming bed and breakfast by the lake, while her parents took care of the boys. Emily watched him constantly and catered to him, trying to please him as if her position depended on it. So why wasn't he happier? Nick reflected on this while he was in the middle of a frantic afternoon at work. Unable to concentrate, he shoved his paperwork aside, leaned back in his chair, and put his feet up on the desk, giving himself 15 minutes to think. One thing was clear, he still didn't trust her. The betrayal with Pritzker, even though it hadn't gone all the way, still left him feeling bitter every time he thought about it. His rational mind said that Emily would never try something like that again, but the fact that she had done it once was a painful reminder. His anger had subsided, but it was still close to the surface. He realized there was another issue. He almost didn't have a wife anymore. He had a servant. Emily seemed nervous, always walking on eggshells, constantly checking his face for signs of disapproval or anger. Her mantra seemed to be to please Nick, or at least not to upset him, giving him everything he wanted even before he knew he wanted it. In the happier days of their marriage, Emily had been a delightful partner, energetic, funny, feisty, and not a pushover. She stood up for herself, disagreed with Nick when she thought he was wrong, and even mocked him at times. They had been equals, loving partners, unafraid to challenge each other. Now, that was all gone. Nick was sure he had changed too. He was harder, more closed off. He didn't come home every day and share details about work or engage Emily in conversations about their relationship. He observed her coolly and accepted her attempts to cater to him, whether it was a nice dinner or intimate moments, even if she seemed reluctant. He realized he didn't want a submissive partner. He wanted his old wife back. But he was self-aware enough to see that it wasn't just her behavior that had changed. His own behavior had too, and he had no idea how to restore what they once had. It was the third week of September. Emily was back to teaching, but was still managing special dinners, maintaining her energy and attentiveness, and putting in the effort to make their intimate moments special. He could see the strain on her face when she didn't know he was watching her. Then, one Thursday around 6:30 p.m., as he approached her in the kitchen with a high honey in reach to give her a kiss, She backed away coldly. "I understand someone's had a promotion," she said through clenched teeth, sounding like a seriously upset drill sergeant. "Were you ever planning to tell me about it?" Before Nick could reply, she turned away, waving a hand dismissively. "No, don't even say a word. I'm going to get the boys," she said, and stormed out into the yard to call for Charlie and Ben. During dinner, while the boys chattered away, Emily shot murderous glances. It was almost amusing to Nick, who realized he hadn't seen his wife angry with him in nearly 2 months. He was sort of enjoying it, though he wasn't sure why. Emily rejected Nick's help in getting the boys to bed, so he gave up and watched a rerun of NCIS. When she came into the living room around 9, he could see she was ready to confront him. "Fine," he thought. "Let's fight. Let's see what that's like." "Do you know how embarrassing it was talking to Suzanne today?" Emily glared at him, standing over him with her arms folded. "She needed to remind you to bring your passport and arrange for the visas for your trips to Japan and Singapore." And then she said, "Oh, Emily, you must be so proud of him with this big promotion and all. Did you have a big celebration?" I was so stunned I didn't know what to say. I stammered something about it being great. I felt like an idiot. "Nick, Susan knew you were promoted back in July, and here it is more than 2 months later, and you haven't mentioned it. Was I supposed to go the rest of my life, not knowing I was married to the vice president for Far East sales? Is that none of my business all of a sudden?" She paced around the room, then sat down in the armchair across from the sofa. Nick hadn't opened his mouth. She continued, unable to believe he'd kept this from her. She was humiliated, furious, and it seemed like her anger was letting her discharge some of the tension from the past few weeks. "I know our marriage is on thin ice, and I know it's because I made mistakes. Believe me, there's not an hour that goes by when I don't think about that. But you promised that we would both give it a try, staying together, and I thought that meant talking to each other, sharing news about significant events, like, I don't know, a huge promotion." Emily's mouth snapped shut, and she glared at him. Nick could see her eyes were tearing up. "Well," he said, "you certainly seem to be worked up about this. You think?" She interrupted, "But I wonder whether Suzanne mentioned exactly when I got the promotion." Emily shook her head. "She just said it was in July sometime. And you happen to remember anything else I found out about in July?" Her face went pale, and she looked down. "Yes, of course I do. I learned about you in Pritzker before I got a chance to tell you about the promotion," he said, letting his voice harden. "By the way, I learned about it the same day I came home at lunchtime, and found your email open, and saw your messages to that person." Emily gasped and stared at him. He had never told her this before. "When I realized you had been keeping something from me, something pretty important to our marriage, I didn't exactly feel like sharing my news with you. Is that so hard to understand?" She shook her head, looking miserable. All the fight had gone out of her. Now, Nick was on his feet, pacing. "Yeah, you're right. I should have told you. But I guess I was enjoying keeping my secret from you a little bit of tit for tat. Plus, at least my secret was something good, not something sleazy and selfish." "I'm going for a walk," he said, and headed out the door, not looking back at her, crying quietly. The next morning, getting breakfast on the table, and Ben and Charlie dressed and fed, was almost entirely silent. Emily and Nick moved around one another smoothly and efficiently, but without warmth. Nick didn't know what Emily was feeling. He himself was calm, even relaxed. Their argument the night before and his long walk around the neighborhood had brought some things into focus for him. When she came back into the house after seeing the boys onto the school bus, she headed for the bedroom without a word. His voice startled her, and she jumped a little. She turned and looked at him, appearing unhappy and wary. "How about if I bring home some takeout tonight so you don't have to cook?" "That would be nice, Nick," she said carefully. They discussed various options and decided on Five Guys hamburgers, which the boys adored. "And I'd like us to spend some time together tonight when the boys are in bed, okay?" Looking even more concerned, she nodded. Nick came over, held her gently, and kissed her, feeling her stand as rigid as a statue in his arms. The boys loved the hamburgers predictably, and Nick and Emily collaborated on bathing them and getting them into bed, smiling at one another when the usual bathtub water fight soaked the bathroom floor. When both kids were sleeping soundly, Nick and Emily settled themselves at opposite ends of the living room couch. The warm, comradely feeling they'd had while taking care of Ben and Charlie had dissipated, and he could feel the tension coming from her. "Okay," he said, watching her weary eyes. "Last night was good, I think." Emily looked surprised for a moment, then her face softened. "Yes, I think so too." They both stopped and laughed. Nick said, "I have some things to say, but you can go first." Emily said, "The reason I think it was good is because it hurt me so much. I mean, though you were with this huge promotion, this exciting new job, and probably lots more money, and I didn't know anything about it. You kept this huge secret from me. I felt so excluded and so betrayed. I was so angry, and then you told me exactly when you found out. Of course, I understood why you hadn't told me. All this time, I thought you only learned about my affair when I told you in the letter. I had no idea you found it out on your own. My God, Nick, I am so sorry for that." She sighed. "That took the wind right out of my sails. But when I thought about it later, I realized what a good lesson it was for me. For weeks, I've been feeling so terrible about what I did, how badly I've hurt you, and terrified you're going to leave me. And this is the first time I just felt hurt myself. How could you do that to me? And then I realized, well, Emily, maybe for the first time you're getting a tiny taste of how Nick has been feeling all this time. Betrayed, left out, kept in the dark. Except the secret I kept from you was 1,000 times worse." She stopped, looking down, and you could see the tears on her cheeks. "So I figured, anything that hurts me that way and lets me be in your shoes a little bit is probably good for me. I've been feeling so guilty and frightened that I haven't spent enough time actually thinking about how you must be feeling." She laughed sadly. "After last night, that problem is gone." Nick waited, but Emily was done talking. He said, "Yeah, I think so too. That's one of 2 reasons last night was good. But the other, strangely enough, is that it was the first time in more than 2 months that you've stopped cringing around me. You were furious. You really let me have it. And guess what? I realized I missed it." They smiled at each other, both amused. "I mean, I wanted you to be more accommodating for a while, feeling guilty and ashamed, terrified I was about to walk out the door. But it's starting to get old. You know, obsequious Emily is not the woman I married. She's not the woman I love. And I realize that while you keep wanting me to trust you again, you haven't been trusting me not to leave. I mean, you don't trust that I love you, and that I'm trying to give you another chance." He was getting a little agitated now and took a breath. "Why should I trust you after what you did when you won't trust me? So you need to do that, Emily. You need to start being yourself and remember how long I've loved you." He paused again. "Maybe you were being a doormat because you thought I was insisting on it. But I'm done with that. The month I promised you has stretched to 7 weeks, and I'm still here. I'm still here, sleeping in bed with you every night, and I'm not seeing anyone else." He watched her think about it, and then she nodded. "Okay," she said. "I'll work on that." They spent the rest of their evening apart. At 10:20, Nick was suddenly so exhausted he couldn't hold his head up, so he undressed, brushed his teeth, and went to sleep. Later, he felt Emily slide into bed behind him. She kissed the back of his neck, and then snuggled up to spoon him. Nothing particularly dramatic happened after that. Nothing sudden, but things started to get better. He noticed after about a week that he felt warmer towards Emily, that their conversations were easier and a little less stilted. One night, when he forgot to stop for the dry cleaning he said he'd pick up, she snapped at him for being thoughtless, then stopped, looking at him a little worried, then shrugged her shoulders and went back to cooking. "You're right, Emily. Sorry, I'll get it tomorrow, I promise," he said. He watched her look back at him with a little half-smile. "Okay," she said, and they let it drop. The next morning, Emily was in the kitchen when Nick walked in. "I did it today," she said quietly, her back to him, facing the stove. He'd just come home from work, and knew right away what she meant. They had discussed it and planned it a few days ago, how Emily was going to contact Pritzker's wife, in case she didn't already know about the affair. "How did it go?" he asked. She came over, gave him a quick kiss, looking tired and a little pale. "Not as bad as I was afraid it would be." When I explained why I was calling, there was this long silence, and then she said, "Actually, this isn't the first time I've heard this story. Turns out Jason's been pulling this on her for years. She's caught him twice before. So I apologized again, got her email address, and forwarded all her messages to her in case she needs them for evidence." She said, "After the last time, I told him and absolutely promised her parents that if it ever happened again, he was gone. I think she was going to call a locksmith right away so he wouldn't even be able to get into the house." At the end of the day, he gave her a slight smile. It couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. Emily sighed a little and put her arms around him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Nick. I know I've said it a million times, but right now I'm feeling sorry for her too, and for what I did. 3 kids and married to that selfish person, about to be a single mom, and what I did didn't help at all. Honestly, Emily," he said, "and I'm not even trying to make you feel better, but if he hadn't gone after you, it would have been somebody else. The guy is a lowlife. I can feel sad for his wife and kids too. But Pritzker has it coming. They were doing better, they were almost there, but he couldn't let it go just yet." A few days before Halloween, Nick came into the office and found Suzanne weeping quietly at her desk. "Suzanne, what's wrong?" he asked. She looked up, embarrassed. "It's nothing. It's just Matt." Matt was Suzanne's son. He was 26. Nick took her hand gently. "Come on, let's go into my office." He settled her down on his couch and closed the door. "Is he all right? Is he hurt?" She shook her head. "No, it's not that. It's Tina, his fiancée. She broke up with him." Nick sat with Suzanne for a while, listening quietly, patting her hand. The story came out. Matt and Tina were only 3 months away from their wedding, and he had made a mistake. He and his friends got really drunk on a trip to Miami Beach, and he ended up having a one-night encounter with someone he met at a bar. Tina heard about it through mutual friends and broke off the engagement, returning Matt's ring and refusing to speak to him. "Suzanne," she said, "Matt knows he messed up, Nick. He's beside himself. He's apologized, told her he'd do anything to make it up to her, and promised he'd never make such a mistake again. He even asked about counseling, but she's just so hurt and angry. It breaks my heart, not just because Matt's my son, but because they were so good together. They really made each other happy. It's such a waste, a great relationship thrown away because of one really poor decision." They talked about it for a while, and Susan eventually started to feel a little better. She gave Nick a half-smile. "Thanks for listening to me, Nick. I'm sorry for getting so emotional." "Don't be silly, Suzanne. I'd be upset too. I'm sorry for Matt. Maybe after some time has passed, Tina will give him another chance." Susan went to the ladies' room to wash her face, and Nick finally sat down to work. But the story kept popping back into his mind all day, making him reflect on his own situation with Emily. On the drive home, he asked himself the big question he had wrestled with over and over again that summer. Was he better off with Emily or without her? The answer was pretty obvious. Did he want to be a divorced man, seeing his kids a couple of times a week at best, living in an apartment, trying the dating scene again? No. Did he think Emily would ever cheat on him again? Well, nothing in life is ever a sure thing, but she had owned up to her mistake and done everything she could to make it up to him. Did he still love her and find their family life fulfilling? That was the easiest answer of all. He called Emily from the car. "Hi, Emily. Listen, do you think you could get a sitter on short notice? I'd like to take you out to dinner tonight." "No, nothing special is going on. I just want some time with my wife." "Yeah, okay. I'll be home in 20 minutes. You can tell me then." "Thanks." At dinner, Nick loved the meal at Bistro Romano, and Emily was a little tipsy, having enjoyed most of their bottle of wine. Since Nick was driving, he paid the sitter, watched her leave, then locked the front door and turned off the outside lights. Emily was waiting for him by the stairs, smiling, but he said, "Come into the kitchen with me, would you? I'd like another half glass of wine." She had been wary at first, wondering if something serious was on Nick's mind, but after a nice dinner, she was feeling relaxed and happy. They sat down, and Nick told her about Suzanne's son and his broken engagement. He reached across the table and took Emily's hand. "I've been thinking about it all day. Such an unhappy ending. Such a waste of what sounds like it was a great relationship. I don't want an unhappy ending for us, Emily, but I want this to be over. You and me, it's time to decide once and for all. I love you with all my heart, but going forward, can I trust you? No, I cannot. I cannot live every day of my life wondering if my wife is being unfaithful. I cannot live with the fact that you thought about being with another person. In all the years we've been married, I never thought of loving or sharing a bed with anyone other than my wife. But you not only thought about it, but acted on it until I found out. I would never know if you were truly sorry for almost making a mistake or sorry that I caught you. Yes, you never had a physical relationship with him, but you shared tender moments with someone who was not your husband. That makes me feel inadequate, like I cannot make my wife happy. In the last few weeks, you've been a wonderful wife, doing everything to try to win me back. But I cannot find the person I married. I wanted to scare you to try to win you back, but what I forgot is that I am your husband, and I should not have to fight for your love and faith. A marriage is like a house, walls of love, and a foundation of respect and trust. For you, I have lost both. If we decide to stay together, there may be days in the future when we wake up and fight, and I might bring up your indiscretion, which would be painful for us both. I don't want to hold on to painful memories, so let me leave with the good ones. Tonight, my love, let's have this dinner, and then I'll walk out of the house in your life. I have filed for divorce, and you will be served in the coming week. We will share custody of the kids and try to be good parents to them. Let us not expose them to our bitterness and hatred." All this while, Emily was crying, but deep down, she understood that he could not move on from what she had done. A few months later, they were divorced. There was no animosity or fights. They discussed the separation of assets and were fair to each other. The kids were growing, and in their own lives, they were growing apart. As time went on, we grew apart, each leading our separate lives. I maintained a respectful relationship with my ex-wife and never spoke badly or with hatred about her. She never remarried or dated anyone, and neither did I. Not that we were competing. I did it because I had lost faith in love. I never asked her why she never dated again. 15 years later, Emily passed away from cancer. I attended her funeral and visited her in the hospital once. On that visit, she handed me a letter and specifically asked that I not open it as long as she was still alive. That evening, back at home, I finally opened the letter. She didn't write much, but her words were heartfelt. All these years, I lived with the hope that one day we would be back together. It did not happen in this lifetime. If I get another chance to be born, I would want to be your faithful wife. I love you. Yours forever, Emily. A tear rolled down my cheek as I whispered to myself, I love you, Emily. Emily, my lost love. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.